How you doing there? Welcome back to Babble on Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Samach Beis, Daf 62 of Masechta Chullin. Friends, on Samach Beis, we continue pushing ahead with the Simane Taira, with the kosher signs of birds. Yesterday we discussed the Simane Taira of birds, like having the back toe and the zefek and the korkivan that peels, as well as being a bird that doesn't dores, it's not a bird of prey. Now, we had learned yesterday from the Nesher that the Nesher has none of these kosher signs, and it is not kosher, right? It's tameh. So we said when it has no kosher signs like the Nesher, it's certainly tameh. But if it has even one of the kosher signs, it could potentially be tahor. It could potentially be kosher. We just need to check the blacklist that has 24 entries on it. These are psukim in the Torah, Parshas Shmini, Parshas Re'eh in Sefer Devarim. So we just need to reference the blacklist, ensure that these birds are not on the blacklist, and as long as it has at least one siman taira, one indication that it's kosher, it is kosher. We are going to continue pushing ahead with that discussion today. And yeah, we're going to be seeing a lot of like kind of technical kinds of things, like this bird and that bird and the other bird. So friends, this is what we have to look forward to on Daf Samach Beis of Masechta Chullin. Come, join me, let's have a great time and learn Daf Samach Beis of Masechta Chullin. Friends, we begin on Daf Samach Aleph Omid Beis all the way at the bottom. Amr of Nachman. We are now on Daf Samach Beis Omid Aleph. Hoyabaki Boen Uvishmosen. If a person is an expert when it comes to the paras and the ozniya, he knows exactly what the paras is. He knows exactly what the ozniya is. He also knows all sorts of variations of things that they might call paras and ozniya and is or isn't it. Imamish is an expert when it comes to the paras and the ozniya. Of haba b'simin echad tahor. So that being the case, if he stumbles upon another bird that has one siman tahara, like the paras and the ozniya only have one siman tahara, and they are tamid, they're not kosher, but he's an expert. He knows exactly what the paras and the ozniya is, and he knows that this bird that he just found is not that. It is not a paras, it's not an ozniya, it has one siman tahara. Says Rav Nachman, tahor. Lo hayabaki boyed vishmosen. However, if he was not an expert in all things paras and ozniya, b'siman echad tameh. Well then, if he finds a bird that has but one siman tahara, he has to assume that it's tameh, because we have to be concerned that maybe this is a paras or an ozniya. B'shnei simanin. Now, if one finds a bird that has two simane tahara, tahor v'hu sheyakir orev. And if he finds a bird that has two simane tahara, so then it's tahor as long as he knows what an orev is. And because orev was the sole example, the single example, the only example on the list of 24 tameh birds, the orev is the only example that has two simane tahara. So if he finds a bird that has two simane tahara and is not the orev, he knows it's not the orev, well then it is kosher. Orev v'sulo. Now, frek the Gemara, 1 second. If he finds a bird that has two simane tahara and it's not the orev, he's good to go? Really? No other concerns? The thing is, when it comes to orev, the pasuk says orev, and it says lemino. It's type. It's not just the orev. It's the orev represents the family of orev. The what's the word I'm thinking of? I don't know. But orev is like a category. I think probably maybe that's the word I'm thinking of. It's the orev represents a category of birds that are not just the orev, but birds that are in the orev category of birds. So therefore, if one finds a bird that has two simane tahara and it's not an orev, that should be inadequate, because you also have to make sure, not just that it's a lot of negatives over here, not just that it's not in Orev, but it also is not allowed to be any bird from the Orev category. V'atane, after all, we learn in a brisa, Orev ze Orev. Okay, when it says in the pasuk, it adds Orev to the blacklist, so it adds, of course, the Orev, but at the same time, limino. It says to its type, to its category. And it's not just the Orev, it's also the category. Now, Rabbi Eliezer Omer Lahavi es Hazarzir. Rabbi Eliezer says that we also come to include the Zarzir, that if you find a bird with two simanei taira, if it is the Zarzir, it is Tameh. Amilo, Rabbi Eliezer, however, the Chacham say to Rabbi Eliezer, Valo anshe kfar Tmarta should be Yehuda, but what about the people in Kfar Tmarta in the area of Eretz Yisrael called Yehuda? Hayu ochlim osan mipnei sheish len zefek. They would eat the zarzir because the zarzir had a zefek, and Rashi says, and the orev doesn't have a zefek. The orev has two simani taira. Neither of them are that it has a zefek, and say the Chachamim that the people in Kfar Tmarta, they would eat the zarzir because it had a zefek. So why are you saying that it is asur? Because it's part of the raven family. Well, the Orev family. So Omar Loem, so Rabbi Eliezer says, Aphein asidin litein esadin. Well, they are going to be in big trouble. They should not be doing that. Okay. Tosfos says that even though they're arguing about the zarzir, right, still that doesn't preclude the fact that limino also is not, it's more than just potentially the zarzir, but it's the category of the orev. Alternatively, limineu, that when it says limineu or limino by the orev, lehavi snunis levana, it's coming to include the snunis levana is tameh. Rabbi Eliezer, that's Rabbi Eliezer's opinion. Amilo, they said to Rabbi Eliezer, "Valo anshe galila elyon ochlim." Also, the people in the upper Galilee would eat the snunis levana. Mipnei korkivanu niklaf, because its korkivan was peelable. Therefore, they were eating it. It's a little bit of a question what exactly this means. Does it mean that the orev doesn't have a peelable korkivan? Maybe it does. I'm not going to get into that shaila. So Omar Loim Afinasidin Nitan Es Adin, and Rabbi Eliezer says to the Chacham, well, the people of the upper Galilee are going to be in big trouble for eating this snonis levana. Okay, so what's the point over here? There was a little bit of technicalities over there. However, the point being that Orev is not just Orev. Orev is limino. Orev is the category of Orev. It includes other things as well. So therefore, if a person finds a bird with two simani ta'ira, it's not enough to just check that it's not the Orev. Again, sorry for all the negatives. I hope it's clear. You also have to check to make sure it's not anything belonging to the Orev category. So Ela Orev v'chol min Orev. Okay, yeah, that's correct. If you find a bird with two simani ta'ira, you have to check. It's not an Orev, nor is it any member of the Orev category. If it is not an Orev and not a member of the Orev category, eat it. Omer Ameimer, says Ameimer, Hilchasa, the halacha is, drum roll please. Of haba b'simin echad, if you find a bird that has one simin tahor, v'udilo doris. If you find a bird that has one simin ta'ara, it's kosher, as long as it is not doris. So Rashi understands this to mean that if you find a bird with a simin ta'ara, so let's say it has a korkivan niklaf, so then it's kosher as long as you can be sure that additionally it is not doris. Initially, it's not a bird of prey. Tosfos understands it to mean that if you find a bird and it has one simin ta'ara, and that simin ta'ara is that it is not a bird of prey, it is tahor. Okay, fine. Amar Rav Ashi Lamemer. Rav Ashi said Lamemer. Ha do Rav Nachman. But what about Rav Nachman? Rav Nachman said at the very beginning of the daf, right? If you look, the second line of today's daf of Samach Beis Amud Aleph, we had said, this is according to Rav Nachman, that so long as you aren't familiar with the paris and the ozniya, if you find a bird with one siman, it's tameh. So why is a meimer saying that halacha is hab of abab b'siman echad tahor v'udulo daris? Amalei Rav Azar, fine. So Amalei, so a meimer responds, lo shmieli klomar lo severely. Says I don't hold like that. Okay. Ma'ika, because after all, what's your concern? Mishum paris v'ozniya. If you find the bird that has one siman tire, what are you concerned that maybe this is the paris or the ozniya? Leisnu ba'yishuv. The paris and the ozniya, they live far out in the wilderness. They don't live in inhabited areas. And therefore, practically speaking, there's no concern that you're finding a paris or an ozniya. And therefore, if you find a bird with one siman tire, it is, as long as it's not dores, it is kosher. Rav Yehuda says, Rav Yehuda, ofa misarit, a bird that scratches, kosher l'taris mitzorah. A bird that scratches is kosher for the purification of a mitzorah. Whereas with all of the korbanos in the Torah, we always talk about doves and turtle doves. When it comes to the taras and mitzorah, however, when he says it takes two birds and you slaughters one and then the other one you dip in the blood and you set free. So those birds are not Torah and Bnei Yonah. They are tzipor drawers. And says Rabbi Yehuda, ofa misarit, that a scratchy bird, kosher l'taris mitzorah, is kosher for this ritual. V'zoi snunis levana shnechliku ba Rabbi Eliezer v'Chachamim, and this is the snunis levana that Rabbi Eliezer and the Chachamim had argued about earlier. Right, we had said the people in the Galilee. Right, so Rabbi Eliezer had said that the snunis levana, right, that limino it says that an orev is tameh, limino, and in addition to including everything in the category of the orev, there was also a machlokas between Rabbi Eliezer and the Chachamim with regard to the snunis levana. Rabbi Eliezer had said that it is not kosher. The Chachamim said the people in the Upper Galilee would eat it because it had the cork of a niklaf. So again, on Rabbi Yehuda, ofa misarid kosher l'taris mitzorah v'zohi snunis levana shnechel kuba Rabbi Eliezer v'Chachamim, and this of amasrid is the snunis levana that Rabbi Eliezer had said is tameh and the Chachamim had said is tor. Amar Ameimer says Ameimer bechivra karsa, if we're talking about a snunis that has a white belly, kule'ama lo plige desharia, everyone agrees that it is in fact kosher. Ki plige b'diruka, where they argue, where Rabbi Eliezer and the Chacham argue, is about a green-bellied snunis. B'diruka karsa. Rabbi Eliezer says it's a green-bellied snunis is also. Rabbanan Shara, the Chacham say it's permitted that it is not kosher, that it's tummy. Marzutra masni, Marzutra teaches like this: B'diruka karsa kule amalo pligi d'aser. If we're talking about a yellow-bellied snunis, everyone agrees that it is not kosher. Ki plige bit dechivra, where they argue about is the white-bellied snunis. B'dechivra karsa, Rabbi Eliezer says it's also. Rabbanan Sharu, the Chacham said that the white-bellied snunis is permitted. And the Allah is like the rabbis that the white-bellied snunis is permitted. The Sharu that they permit it. So I understand, according to Marzutra, who says that the machlekes is by the white-bellied snunis. So hainu dikatani snunis levana. That is why earlier in the brayso that we had quoted earlier, with Rabbi Eliezer and the Chachamim and the people of the Upper Galilee, it said that it was talking about a snunis levana. Right? It says limino comes to include snunis levana, and Rabbi Eliezer says it's tameh. The Chachamim said it's tor. So I understand, like, who is it? Marzutra? I can't find it. Marzutra. So I understand, like Marzutra says that machlekes between between Rabbi Eliezer and the Chacham is by a snunis levana, a white-bellied snunis. So that's like what we had said earlier, that they argue about the white-bellied snunis. According to Mandamar, who says that they argue specifically about the green-bellied snunis, my snunis levana. Then what's the snunis levana that we mentioned earlier in the Brisa? The machlekes between Rabbi Eliezer and the Chachamim, lafuke debate de uchmese. Well, levana only to the exclusion. It was actually, they actually argue about the green-bellied snunis, but when it said that this is the white-bellied, it's only to the exclusion of the black-bellied snunis, which lives in like the walls and nooks and crevices of like house walls and stuff. But really the machlekes is by the green-bellied snunis. That's exciting. Omar Rachbe, Omar Rabbi Yehuda. Says Rachbe, the name Rabbi Yehuda. Tosfos points out that this is not actually Rabbi Yehuda. It's not the Tana Rabbi Yehuda. It's not Rabbi Yehuda Rabbi Lai. It is the Amora Rabbi Yehuda, the Rosh Hashiva in Pumbedisa. Tosfos suggests that Rabba called Rav Yehuda because he was his Rabba Muvhak. He was his primary Rebbe. Anyway, says Rachba in the name of Rav Yehuda, Tasil Pasul mishum torin v'kasher mishum b'nei Yonah. What he's saying is essentially that the bird that's called a tasil is an example of a ben Yonah. Of course, when it comes to korbanis, there are turtle doves, which are torin, and there's the young doves, which are the b'nei Yonah. And we learned in the Mishnah on Daf Chav Beis Amid Aleph, we learned kasher b'torin pasul b'nei Yonah, kasher b'nei Yonah pasul b'torin. I just read from the Mishnah on Daf Chav Beis that be'etzim the Torin and Bnei Yonah are the opposite. The Bnei Yonah are kosher to be used as korbanos when they are young. Young doves that's what they're, young doves. Once they are adults, they can no longer be used for korbanos. The Torin are the opposite. When they are young, they can't be used as korbanos. When they are older, they can be used as korbanos. Now, so says Rachba in the name of Rav Yehuda that the bird that's called the tasil is essentially a ben Yonah. Pasul mishum torin, it would be pasul as a tor, i.e. it's pasul when it's an adult, v'kasher mishum bnei Yonah, and it's kosher as a ben Yonah, it is kosher when it is young. Datzife v'torin shel Rachba, ironically, this is Rachba teaching this teaching, and it's about a bird that's called the torin shel Rachba bird. So when it comes to Datzife and torin shel Rachba, ksherin mishum torin, they are kosher as torin. Ufsul mishum ben Yonah, they are apostle as ben Yonahs. Mosif of Daniel Bar Katina. Daniel Bar Katina asks the following question from a Mishnah in Masechta Para. The Mishnah says, "Kol ha'ofis poslim b'meichatas." When it comes to mayim kedoshim is water that the meichatas, water that the Efer Para Aduma has been mixed into. If a bird comes and drinks from that water, the water becomes pasul. The reason is because the bird, as explained by Rashi, the reason is that the bird will come and he'll stick his beak in, and then as he lifts his beak out, some of the water falls back in to the mayim kedoshim, and it'll be considered, this water that basically falls out of the bird's beak back into the water will be considered like water that work has been done with it, and water that work has been done with it is pasul for mei chatas, for sprinkling the ashes of the paraduma. So the Mishnah says, "Kol ha'ofis," all birds, postin b'meichatas, if they slurp up meichatas, if they drink from meichatas, they make the meichatas pasul chutz min hayoina, except for a dove. Mipnei she'motzitzos, because doves suck. Instead of dipping their beak in and lifting it out, and some of the water falls out, they suck. They have suction, and therefore the water goes in their mouth, and none of it goes back into the mechatas, and the mechatas remains kosher. Now, ve'emisa, the question is, if it is so that the tasil is a type of ben Yonah, so lesne it should say chutz miyona v'tasil. It should say that there's not just one exception to this rule, but two. Yonahs and tasils, when they slurp up water, it remains tahor. means kosher. Amar Rab Zer says, Rab Zer is zamotzitz umeki v'zamotzitz v'einu meki. The dove is able to suck up water and none of it is expelled. None of it will go back into the mechatas. That's not the case, however, by the tasil. Some of it will end up going back into the water, therefore it's not allowed by the tasil, but it is technically still a type of ben yonah. Amar Rav Yehuda says, Rav Yehuda, Hane kofshane tzotziane. Kofshane are tors, turtle doves. Tzotziane are from a place called tzotziane ksherim legab mizbech. So these kofshane tzotziane could be offered as korbanos on the mizbech, chatasof, olasof. Vehenein torin sharachba, and these are the torin sharachba that we spoke about the other minute. Meisvei, however, we have a kasha from Mishnayis and Masechta Para as well as Masechta Negoyim. That the Mishnayis say over there regarding the Ezo, Hyssop. Hyssop is used in the sprinkling of the Mei Para Aduma, the Mechatos, as well as the sprinkling of the during the Tyrus Mitzora, there's water and the blood of one of the birds, and you take the other bird and the eitzer, shnitulas, etc., and you sprinkle it on the mitzora. Now, with regard to the azov, with regard to the hyssop that we're using in the sprinklings, so it has to be pure, just plain azov, plain and simple azov, hyssop. V'lo azov yavon, not Greek azov, which is ironic because I'm going to give a analogy with Greek in just a minute. V'lo ezov kuchli, v'lo ezov romi, v'lo midbari, v'lo kol ezov sheyesh lo shem levai. When we're looking for a hyssop for a paraduma, and when we're looking for a hyssop for Tyrus and Mitzora, we're looking for plain old hyssop, not Greek hyssop, not blue hyssop, hyssop. Omar Abai says no. So the point being that just like by hyssop, we're looking for plain old hyssop. So when it comes to turtle doves, we should be looking for plain old turtle dove, not tzutziani turtle doves. Omar Abai says, Abai, look, when it comes to azov, when it comes to hyssop, the reason why we're looking for plain old hyssop is because at the time that the Torah was written, there already existed different types of hyssop. There already was Greek hyssop and blue hyssop and desert hyssop, etc. And yet, the Torah in 0 places, when it mentions azov, mentions Greek hyssop or desert hyssop, any other kind of hyssop. The Torah could have, because at that point different types of hyssop existed, and yet the Torah was specific to write just plain old hyssop. That's why it's plain old hyssop. But when it came to doves, these other types of doves, the tzutziani dove was not a thing yet, and therefore the Torah didn't write anything about it. But that's not to preclude it, just simply it wasn't a thing yet, and therefore it wasn't written. And therefore essentially it's not excluded from the fact that it's not mentioned, from no other versions are mentioned. So Amar Abai says, Abai, kol shenishtane shmo kol ma'in Torah, anything that its name changed prior to ma'in Torah, ve'fkida Torah olav, ve'hekpida Torah olav, and even so the Torah was makbid to say plain old hyssop, yeshlo shem levoi pasul, Levi pasul. Any other versions of hyssop, like desert hyssop, Greek hyssop, etc., are pasul. V'hani, but when it came to turtle doves, lo nishtanu shman kod ma'in Torah, there were no changes of names before ma'in Torah. There were no alternatives, and therefore none of them were written, but it's not to exclude them. Rava says, Rava, hanikufshani tzotziane be'asrayu stama karilu. Rava disagrees. Rava has a different approach. Rava says, look, when it comes to Azov versus Azov Yavon and Azov Kuchlani or whatever, those are all different types of Azov. They're all different types of hyssop. When it comes to Kofshani Tzotziani, when it comes to these types of doves, there isn't actually something called a tzotziani dove. No, we're just saying the doves from tzotziani, but it's just a regular dove. If you go to tzotziani and say, I want a tzotziani dove, they'll say, what's a tzotziani dove? Do you want a dove? Kilu, when we talk about tzotziani doves, it's just a way of saying the doves from tzotziani, but it isn't actually a different kind of dove, and that's why it is permitted. So Rava says you're right. If it would be a different type of dove, just like different types of azov are asur, so different types of doves would be asur as well. But this tzotziani dove is not actually a different type of dove. It's just we're saying literally the doves from tzotziani. And I thought of an analogy that I mentioned earlier with Greek. It reminded me of, for example, like Israeli salad. Israeli salad isn't a thing. If you go to a falafel monger in Eretz Yisrael and say, okay, put in some Israeli salad, and say, what's Israeli salad? Salad. In America, growing up, we called it Israeli salad because it's the salad that they have in Israel. But in Israel, it's just salad. As opposed to maybe a Greek salad. I don't know what they call Greek salad in Greece, but Greek salad is a type of salad. It's a specific version of salad. You can even go to Greece and potentially say, I want a Greek salad, and they'll know what it is. It's a type of salad. It's not just what they call salad in Greece, but it's a particular type of salad. So here also, when it comes to the kofshani tzotziani, it's just a regular turtle dove. That's why it is allowed. Amar Rabbi Yehuda, says Rav Yehuda, Hane karze, these grasshoppers, devei chilfe, of the rushes, sharu, they are kosher. Udevei karbe, asire, but the grasshoppers of the cabbage patch is also. So if you find a grasshopper in your halapchis, it's also. Amar Ravina, says Ravina, umalkina alayu, it's so asur that you can even get whipped for eating the grasshopper that you find in your halapchis. Mishum sheretz ha'of, for having eaten a sheretz ha'of, you could be chayiv makas for that if you're warned, etc. V'amar Rav Yehuda, says Rav Yehuda, tzrada shari, tzrada is allowed, barda asur, barda is not allowed. V'simanech, and how will you remember which one's allowed and which one isn't? Bar minei, it's like, for example, bar minei, except for that. So bar is like barda. Barda is the one that's not allowed. Mirada sveka, and mirada is a suffix. How do we know this? Rav Asi says, Rav Asi shmona svekasin, because there are 5 things that are doubtful. Chuva, chuga, suga, harnuga, tushlimi, umirada. Mirada is what we had just said a second ago, that it's a suffix. Kuchilna, uvarnafcha. Those are all suffix, including mirada. My svekayu, and what is this suffix? What are we uncertain about when it comes to these 8 items? I'll tell you what we're uncertain about. Ofis tahorim korkivanan niklaf. Look, if you have a bird that is not a predator, it has the back toe, it has a zefek, and it has a korkivan that is peelable, right? That you can just peel it with your hand. It is for sure tahor. If it has all 4 of the simane taira, it is definitely tahor. Where am I? Okay. Vitmein ein korkivanan niklaf. However, if you have a bird that has a back toe and has a zefek and is not a predator, but its korkivan is not peelable by hand, then you have to be concerned that maybe it's one of the 20 items on the list that have 3 simane taira but are nonetheless tameh. V'hane, and when it comes to these 8 items, korkivan and niklaf bisakina, their korkivan is peelable, but it requires a knife, and that's the suffix. Do we consider it like its korkivan is peelable and therefore it's definitely tahor, or do we have to be concerned that maybe it is tameh? But one second, why are we getting so concerned about these korkivans that are technically peelable, just you need to use a knife? What's the big deal? Kilu, what about, for example, there was a young duck by Mar Shmuel, Delo Hava Ka Mikalif Korkivani. They couldn't peel its korkivan. So they left it out in the sun. And they left it out in the sun for a bit, and then the korkivan softened up a bit, and then they were able to remove the inner membrane, the inner layer. So we see that sometimes even kosher korkivans can be a little stubborn. So why are we so concerned about these? What's the suffix regarding these birds where their korkivan just needs a little bit of help with a knife? So Hasam Kirafi Ikalif Biyada. The difference is when it came to that situation with Shmuel where they left out the korkivan in the sun and it softened up a little bit and then the inner layer came right out. So great. They left it out in the sun and the inner layer came right out. Hacha, when we're talking about these 8 suffix, we're talking about scenarios where Apal Gab de Rafi Lo Mikalif Ele B'Sakina. We're talking about even if you would leave it out in the sun, you would still be unable to remove the inner layer without a knife. So we're talking about by these 8 suffix, we're talking about you literally need a knife to get out the inner layer. There is no way to get it out without a knife. So therefore, maybe we have to be concerned that it is Tamei. Amar Abaye, says Abaye, Tarnagola de Agma, the swamp cock, Chad Mishmona Svekis, who, Vainu Miradu, is one of those, the swamp cock is one of those 8 suffix, and it is the Miradu bird. Amar, right, that was one of the 8 suffix. Amar Rapapa says, Rapapa, Tarnagola de Agma, the swamp cock, Asira is forbidden, is not kosher. Tarnagolta de Agma, the swamp hen, Sharia is permitted. Now, as who is this? Tosfos points out, I think Tosfos points out that these are not simply a male and a female, and it's not just a male swamp bird and a female swamp bird. These are actually different types of birds, swamp cocks and swamp hens. You can have male and female swamp cocks and male and female swamp hens. B'simanech, and your sign for which one is Torah and which one is Tamei, Ammoni velo Ammonis. There is a prohibition against men from the nation of Ammon from marrying into Israel, but it is okay for the women of Ammon to marry into Israel. So similarly over here, the swamp hens are kosher, the swamp cocks are not. Darish Meremer Darshan Tarnagolta de Agma, the swamp hen, which we just said is kosher, Asira, is actually not kosher. Because Chazua, the rabbis ultimately observed, the Darsa, that it actually was, in fact, a bird of prey. The Achla, and it ate. Bainu Gerasa, and this is what's referred to as Gerasa. And based on this, based on the fact that initially we had said that the swamp hen is kosher, but then new information became available that it's actually a predator, it's actually dores, and therefore it is not kosher. Rashi says, based on this, that I'm going to read. I'm actually going to. Maybe it's worth. I'm going to read it inside in Rashi, about 6 lines before Rashi gets wide. Umitoch she'ein anu bekiyim boim, nearly the ofa balafanenu. If a bird comes before us, yeshlomer, we have to say shema yidros. We have to be concerned. Maybe it is dores. Because after all, we had this swamp hen. We assumed initially that the swamp hen was tahor, and only zman, and only at some later point did they realize that no, it's actually not tahor. They saw, wait, this swamp hen actually is doresis, it's actually tamei. And all the while, they were mistaken. And therefore says Rashi, Ve'ein of nechol lanu elo b'masores. Therefore, birds, we only eat birds that we have a tradition for. Of shemasru lanu avosenu b'tor, v'shalom masru lanu yesh lachosh. That if we have a tradition that a bird is kosher, like a chicken, everyone's been eating chicken for a long time. So birds that we have a masorah, that we have a tradition that it's kosher, it's kosher. We don't have a tradition that this particular bird is kosher, even though it might have this siman Torah, that siman Torah. We can't assume it's kosher if we don't have a tradition for it. Which is the interest. I think it's an interesting shiloh when it comes to turkey, because I think Dafka turkey, I think we didn't necessarily have a tradition to eat turkey. I mean, I think most people, I think, eat turkey, but not everybody. Not everybody eats turkey, if I'm not mistaken. Let me chop a shlook of tea, and we'll go weiter. All right. Gewaldig. Amar Rav says, Rav, Shabor al Andarfta. Says Rav, Shabor Andarfta. Shari is permitted. Peruz Andarfta. Osir is not allowed. But Simanach Peruz Rishia. There was a famous Russia during their time named Peruz. So Peruz is bad, and the Peruz Andarfta you can't eat. Amar Rav Huna says, Rav Huna, Bunya Shari, Parva Osir. Bunya is allowed, Parva is Osir. V'simanich Parva Amagusha. Parva, the sorcerer. Just like Parva is a sorcerer, so also Parva, what do we say? Parva is not allowed. Okay. Amar Papa says, Papa, Mardu Zagid Va'achil Shari. The Mardu Zagid Va'achil bird is permitted. That's what it's called, the Mardu Zagid Va'achil bird. Now, literally what it means is that the Mardu that stands and eats, that's permitted. Zagid Va'achil, the Mardu Sagid Va'achil, which translates to the Mardu that bends over to eat, also is not allowed. Simanech lo sishtach ve'el acher. If you want to remember which one's which, it's, well, you're not allowed to bow down to other gods. That's how you remember that the Mardu Sagid Va'achil is the one that's not kosher. Amar Shmuel says, Shmuel, Shasya Chamra Asira, that the Shasya Chamra bird is also v'simanech, and the sign to remember Shisuya Yayin Sun La Avoda, that people who are Shisuya Yayin are drunk are not allowed to do avoda. V'amar Shmuel says, Shmuel, Mazga Chamra Asira, Bas Mazga Chamra Shaya, that the Mazga Chamra bird is also, but the daughter of the Mazga Chamra bird is permitted. V'simanech, and your memory trick is Yafa Kocha Ben Mikoch Av, like we saw recently. We're borrowing the phrase of Yafa Kocha Ben Mikoch Av, that the offspring is stronger than the parents. Here also the Bas Mazga Chamra is the one that's permitted. Amar Rabbi Yehuda says, Rabbi Yehuda, Shkitna, when it comes to a Shkitna bird, Ariche Shake, when they have long legs, Vesumke, and they're red, Shire, they're permitted. V'simanach Morzima, just like the Morzima that has long legs and is red and is kosher. Gutzi Vesumke, if it has short legs, stubby legs, and it's red, Asire, it's also V'simanach Nanus Puzzle. And the way to remember is that when it comes to mums of, I think it's mums of Kohanim, right? I believe so. What does Rashi say? Yeah, Mume Kohanim. We're going to learn about it in Masechta Bechoris. So a dwarf is pasul, as that's considered a mum. So here also, if it has short, stubby legs, it is pasul. It's not kosher. Arike Shake, if it has long legs, viroke, and it is green. Asire, V'simanach Yirukim Psulin. And as a way to remember that, we had said that when it comes to birds, if they fell in the fire and its intestines, or no, there are green spots on the heart, or whatever, it is osir. So here also what were these? The long legs but green body birds are osir. Friends, that was Daf Samach Beis of Masechta Chullin. On Daf Samach Beis, we kind of pushed ahead on our identification of birds and different simani tyra of birds, and we ended up kind of getting into a lot of different types of birds and what they are and how they relate based on other birds, and if they're tar and if they're tameh, and which versions are tar and which versions are tameh, and which are suffix, and all sorts of things like that. So friends, that was Daf Samach Beis of Masechta Chullin. I hope you enjoyed. I'll catch you tomorrow. Cheers.